Well, it's pretty amazing they can reply to 55,000 people with complete and outdated lies.
What happens is that people will immediately jump on the welfare line if it is more rational for them to do so.
They've got the best lawyers. They're very experienced in, okay, we'll take the slap on the wrist or we'll pay a few $1 billion that, doesn't really put much of a dent in the bottom line.
Welcome to the Aussie Wire News. Today, we're going global, discussing global issues of vital importance to Australia, starting with a look at the World Health Organization and the people who are calling for Australia to exit the WHO. Then we'll be discussing the worldwide problem of fake jobs. That's right, if you're having trouble finding work despite applying for dozens of jobs, it's very possible that half or more of the jobs you've been applying for simply don't exist. I'll be speaking with Harry Robinson from the Lotus Eaters podcast about this global phenomenon. And finally, I'll be catching up with the Aussie Wire regular contributor Rebecca Barnett about the growing list of countries who are declaring that they're not going to sign up to the new pandemic treaty and related amendments. But before we get to any of those stories, we need to talk about lies. Now, the best lies are the ones that simply slip past, completely undetected because they sound like the truth. And it's only once you stop and think about it that you realize you've been lied to. This is not a new phenomenon, and in fact, it's a tactic as old as time, and most often it's done by simply redefining the meaning of familiar words or introducing new words that people think they understand, but don't. Examples abound, and I'll give you just a few to illustrate the point. Here's an article about a compressed air energy storage facility that's just been approved for construction in Broken Hill, outback New South Wales. It's an upbeat article about how many jobs will be created during construction and the 250 jobs that'll be created on an ongoing basis, which is a much needed jobs boost, which for a town which has mines progressively shutting down. Sounds great, right? Well, here is the lie, buried deep in the body of the article. By storing compressed air underground, the facility is designed to generate 200 megawatts of power for 8 hours, which would be used as a backup supply for the city. When complete, the facility will replace Transgrid's current backup of 2 diesel generators. Did you spot the lie? The lie is the word replace. Energy storage, that is the capturing and storing of man-made energy, is not a replacement for energy generation, or more correctly, energy release from naturally stored sources. Diesel comes from oil, it's refined and transported, and even after all of that work, when it's used in a generator, it produces way more energy than was required to create it, to transport it, and to deliver it. That's what energy generation looks like. By definition, it must result in the release of more energy than went into it. Energy storage, on the other hand, always involves losses, and depending on the exact technologies involved, compressed air storage loses between 35 and 40% of the energy that you put in. What that means is that whilst you can use compressed air as a backup for a small town like Broken Hill, that much of the article is true, you can't honestly call it a replacement for a pair of diesel generators. That's just not in any way accurate or honest. Not only is this going to be vastly more expensive, and by the way, this is another easy way to spot a lie. If they say it's going to be cheaper, but also brag about how many new jobs it's going to create, well, you know that one of those things is a lie, but that's an aside. It's also not a source of power. It's only an inefficient storage of power, which means it's power that has to be generated elsewhere, further driving up the already extraordinary costs. But by saying replace, the journalist seeds the lovely idea that we're getting rid of dirty diesel generators and swapping out some beautiful, clean, compressed air, and everything is beautiful and clean and unicorns and rainbows. That is a lie through the abuse and redefinition of language. And there's plenty more examples. For more than a decade, I've been exposing the lie at the heart of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, which is the federal government plan that is destroying our biggest food bowl and is part of the reason our food is so expensive right now. The whole Murray-Darling Basin Plan is built on the lie of returning water to the environment. In fact, just last month, the federal government rammed through its plan to return a further 450 gigalitres to the environment, which, just like the replace in the last example, return is an outright lie, one that I first exposed in 2010. Here's Skinny Me explaining from way back in 2010, at that time in relation to the proposed North-South pipeline, why the idea of taking water away from irrigation and returning it to the environment is an outright lie.
Let's talk about these water savings for just a little bit longer, shall we? You see, if you believe the Brumby Holdings spin machine, then these water savings create new water, which if it's new, then it must be an increase. That means that our farmers, the environment and Melbourne will all be getting an increase in water, right? Wrong. First, we have to look at where this water has come from. You see, when water is lost from the irrigation system, it doesn't just fall into a black hole. It goes somewhere. Where did this water used to go before it was saved? Well, some of these water savings are coming from making these gates more accurate. These gates were designed to let a little bit of extra water through to make sure that the farmers weren't getting ripped off. Now the government is spending a fortune replacing these gates with more accurate ones. Trouble is, even if these gates are a little bit inaccurate, and even if the farmers are getting a little bit of extra water, well, they are using that water. And making these gates more accurate is going to reduce the quantity and quality of the food which our growers can produce. My point is that every litre saved this way is coming from a food grower. It's not new water. But that only accounts for roughly 1/3 of the water savings. The other 2/3 comes from reducing outfalls and seepage from the irrigation channels themselves. Thing is though, any water that escapes from these channels goes into the environment at large. It goes on to create wet areas, grow native vegetation and eventually replenish groundwater. In other words, every litre lost through outfalls and seepage is actually going to the environment. And every litre saved by reducing outfalls and seepage, well, that's coming from the environment. Now all of that's just a long-winded way of saying that these water savings are not new water. Every single litre saved has come from somewhere or someone. So when John Brumby and Tim Holding claim that the water they're piping to Melbourne hasn't come from farmers or from the environment, guess what? They're lying. You know, I might be being just a little bit too harsh. It's possible that they're not actually lying, but instead they're ignorant and completely incompetent. But I'm still not finished. You see, Brumby and Holding have made it very clear that they intend to pipe the full 75 gigalitres of water to Melbourne this year, despite the fact that they haven't saved 75 gigalitres yet. So, where's that water coming from? Well, unbelievably, some of it's coming from the Lake Eildon Water Quality Reserve, which is water that is kept aside to be flushed down the river system in the event of blue-green algae. Only this year, this election year, it's being piped to Melbourne to be flushed down our toilets in the event of last night's dinner.
In that video, I go through 10 lies. It's titled Lies, Damn Lies, and Politicians. I'll put the link to that in the description of this episode. The point of it is to beware the lies that hide in plain sight. The media, sadly, cannot be trusted to hold our politicians and bureaucrats to account. Not only do they often fail to see these lies, but our journalists actually go ahead and repeat the lies so that they become perceived as truth. That's why, here at the Aussie Wire, everything is based on our values of truth, actual truth, freedom, and hope. Because lies are designed to bind you, but the truth will set you free. Now, here's the news. Well, I said in the introduction that we're going to be focusing on global issues, and nothing is much more global than the World Health Organization. The word world is, of course, in their name for a reason. They want to be the global bureaucracy telling everyone what to do when it comes to health, even inside their own countries. Well, you've probably heard a little bit about that from us here at the Aussie Wire before. You've probably heard a bit about it from others, but there is a group not just talking about it, but actually trying to do something about it. The group calls itself Australia Exits the WHO, and Karen Fox joins me here on the Aussie Wire. Karen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Now, you've started this organisation, or you're involved with this organisation, Australia Exits the WHO. Just before we go anywhere on the actual topic of the amendments and the health regulations and so forth, who are you guys and how did you come into being?
So I didn't start the organisation. I volunteered to help when I saw some social media asking for volunteers. The core group is 8 volunteers from across Australia, from multiple states. And as we like to say, we're trying to take on the globalists around our day jobs. So it's really a group of concerned people that think that the WHO amendments and pandemic treaty are the back door to one world government. And we really think it's the Achilles heel, that if we can try and put a stop to these things, then it might stop the entire globalist train.
Well, there's precedent for this because, of course, Nigel Farage was just a guy down at the pub complaining about the European Union when he then decided, you know what, I'm going to do something about this. And, of course, many years later, he successfully led the UK to exit. So there's precedent for this. What are you actually doing, though, in terms of trying to activate other people and trying to get action to happen? Well, actually, no, before we go there, I apologise. I'm getting ahead of myself. What's the problem that you're trying to fix?
The problem that we're trying to fix is the global power grab that is being orchestrated by the WHO. And the first of those problems that we can address now, seeing as the first set of amendments have already been passed by the Australian government, is the IHR amendments that will be coming at us to be voted on in the World Health Assembly in May 2024. There's 307 amendments, and they include removing the full respect for the dignity, human rights and fundamental freedoms of persons. And I don't really think you need to go much further than that to describe the intent of the document.
It's quite an extraordinary thing to see that actually being explicitly, like, it feels like they just said the quiet part out loud. But putting aside the specifics of what they are and aren't doing in these amendments, the principle of a global health body, when obviously health outcomes and even pandemics will impact different countries very, very differently, is this a process by which Australia is ceding its own sovereignty?
Most definitely. We are at least ceding democracy, because there is multiple sections in this document where they are trying to take control out of the hands of our own government. There is actually an IHR focal point already established within the Department of Foreign Affairs, and the only way that they've weaseled out of saying they're removing sovereignty is that they will be giving direct and binding instructions, legally binding by international law, to this IHR focal point so they can say, oh, we didn't do it, your government did it, you haven't lost any sovereignty. But one of the major clauses is they are taking non-binding out of what were recommendations. So they're seeking to become a legislative body instead of a body that made recommendations that could be taken up or ignored.
For a long time, people who said there was an effort to create a one world government were ridiculed and mocked as conspiracy theorists and obviously just unhinged and ridiculous. That is what appears to be taking shape here. Is there any way you could describe this as not an attempt to create a one world government, at least as regards health issues?
Well, the more interesting part of the One Health topic and the One Health heading is that it covers the entire biosphere. And once you go there, you can bring in climate restrictions, you can bring in restrictions on agriculture, transport, and every other category that they consider to relate to health. So the One Health concept really means for us that this is the equivalent of one world government.
Well, in my editorial at the start of today's episode of the news, I was talking about lies hiding in plain sight. I mean, having amendments to the health regulations in the aftermath of the COVID-19 so-called pandemic, but then actually making them apply to the entire biomass, as you say. I mean, this seems to be just a lie hidden in plain sight, is it not?
Yes, the ability of them to state their plans and yet still have the mainstream media declaring it to be conspiracy theory is one of the great anomalies of our time at the moment.
It's quite extraordinary that we get shut down for misinformation if we simply point out what they actually said. All right, so that's the problem, and it's a pretty big one, and it's coming at us pretty fast. But you've not just simply thrown your hands up in the air and gone and found some sand to stick your head into. What exactly is it that Australia exits the WHO is trying to achieve, and how are you going about it?
One of the most important things is awareness. It's very, very hard to be fighting a war if most people don't know we're in a war.
Sure.
One of the first initiatives was the petition about the amendments that have gone through. We got 55,000 Australians to sign on a very, very dry topic. Unfortunately, we received a beyond disgraceful response from the Minister for Health, which is an open letter, which is on the front page of our website if anyone would like to read it. Not only were the lies 18 months old, they were past tense when we received them as a response to 55,000 Australians, which we thought was beyond shocking. We started a postcards campaign. We sold over 25,000 postcards that were mailed to the offices of Albanese and Dutton, asking them to stand up on the whole situation with the WHO taking over control of a lot of things that Australians should be in control of. I was part of a delegation to Canberra where we spoke to as many politicians who would listen, accompanied by doctors from AMPS and a group of lawyers. And at the moment, the most recent campaign was the People's Letter, which we decided if our country wasn't going to say that we rejected the amendments around the timeframes that were passed on the 1st of December, then 25,000 Australians we managed to get to sign a letter to Geneva in under 4 days. A similar letter from New Zealand worked for the Kiwis. So we have done those campaigns. We have a campaign on the website My Say Matters at the moment where you can send guided letters. So we give you some information on the topics you can talk about, but we want people to write in their own words. And this campaign is directed to the JSCOT committee, which stands for Joint Standing Committee on Treaties. There's a 16-member committee that are supposed to be in charge of the response to all of these amendments. Unfortunately, 4 members of that committee that we have spoken to directly had no idea that they passed the first set of amendments that were buried in a document that was headed Timor-Leste changes.
Wow.
The bureaucrats managed to completely hide it from even the committee that was supposed to be in control of it. So we are asking people to write to the JSCOT committee, which is 16 of our elected representatives, you can also copy and email the same correspondence, which will then be sent to your state senators as well. And it's also set up to send to your own MPs. So again, we know that everyone's got letter writing fatigue and that no one is replying, but we still believe that the volume is what they look at. They believe that one handwritten letter or typed letter is the equivalent of 1,000 people's voices. So every letter that people can get off to their MPs and their senators definitely does have some sort of impact, but it needs to be in numbers. So we're working, again, awareness is the most important thing here. If our parliamentarians that are in charge of these committees don't even know what this is about, obviously the awareness across the community is also very low, and this doesn't get any airplay whatsoever on mainstream media.
It boggles my brain that you're saying so many things that are absolute bombshells just so casually. That they just buried in the Timor-Leste doc. I mean, this is governmental fraud that is just happening before our very eyes, where they're not even being honest with our own elected representatives. How can democracy function when that's going on?
Well, it's pretty amazing they can reply to 55,000 people with complete and outdated lies. That really... That one's blown me away because it wasn't a reply to one person or one group of conspiracy theorists. It was a group to a very large section. It was a reply to a very large section of the population, and the offhandedness of it. I suppose when you have a government that mandated a bioweapon, you're not really sure how much lower they can go.
Well, you've told us about a lot of the tactics that you're using, and I know for a fact that among our politicians, whilst many of them are worse than useless, there are some very good ones in there that are trying to do very good work. And one of the things that they've said to me consistently is what a difference it makes for them and for their influence, I guess, when they have the voice of the people behind them. Things like petitions, things like letter writing campaigns, etc., in conjunction with the work that they're doing from the inside, is potentially a very, very powerful combination. Do you know of any politicians that or I guess maybe some things can't really be spoken about, but which politicians that you can speak about are aware of these problems and are on our side and trying to make a difference here?
Well, we found some more that were on our side that aren't public and aren't going to be public. I believe there's a number in the Liberal Party along those lines, but the usual suspects of more than on side. Ralph Babbitt hosted our group and is definitely on side, and we're in touch with some of his advisors who are brilliant people. We were really pleased to meet some people in Canberra that we had more friends than we were aware of. Obviously, Russell Broadbent, who's just defected from the Liberal Party, is another person that's on side, along with Malcolm Roberts, Jared Rennick, and we're in contact with Alex Antic, who also did a piece for our website. So the usual good guys are definitely on side, but we feel that our real issue, more than the politicians, is with the bureaucrats that are following their own agendas and deliberately attempting to subvert what they're putting in front of the politicians. So I think at times we're very, very hard on the politicians, but the bureaucrats behind them are the ones, as Humphrey Appleby would say, that are always there. And we have struck dead ends with the secretary for the J. Scott Committee and with the staffers that are supposed to be presenting the committee information to the politicians. So there's really a big issue there with the communication getting through to our elected representatives, and another reason that sheer volume of communication is important.
Well, we're of course,
another thing that we've been talking about. Sorry, I'll go straight on. This week is the inquiry into the COVID pandemic, which is intended by the current government to be a whitewash. But it is still rude to announce the submissions opening last Friday and them closing this Friday, 2 weeks out from Christmas. So we've started a campaign to let as many people as possible know. We've decided that for Christmas we should be giving the government all the replies they don't want to this inquiry. It's not a hard process. Dot points and just heartfelt commentary is fine. They put a lot of complicated language on how to make a submission, but the step-through process is actually quite easy. The easiest way I find is to start a Word document and cut and paste it into the right section, or upload a Word document will work. It is not difficult, and again, we're talking volume here. They didn't want anyone that was not on the side of the government to make a submission, so we're encouraging as many submissions from people that perhaps are not happy with the government's COVID response to make their voice heard.
Can I say, you guys have form in terms of being able to get those voices out there. We, of course, helped to publicise that People's Letter that you mentioned a moment ago. It's an incredible achievement. You got 25,000 signatures on that in such short order. I agree. I think it's incredibly important that we get a massive volume of responses here and make it as uncomfortable as possible for the government, and really highlight the fact that they've tried to screw us all over by only giving a week, just 2 weeks before Christmas, for responses to what is a massive topic here. So we're going to put all of these links into the description of this video. Karen Fox, before we go, and unfortunately we are out of time, but before we go, is there anything else you want to leave us with?
Oh, I don't think so, except that our site is australiaexitsthewho.com, and there's a lot of information if you don't understand what's going on, and it's designed to be complicated. Please go to the website. We've got videos, we've got fact packs, we've got a lot of information, we've got flyers you can print out and hand around your neighbourhood. So awareness is the number one thing that we're driving for.
Well, good people doing good work, and I certainly appreciate it. I wish you Godspeed and the wind at your back as you push back, and hopefully we will have our own Brexit moment, but instead it'll be Australia exiting the WHO. Thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire.
Sounds good. Thank you, Topher.
Well, we've all heard it said, there are lies, there are damn lies, and there are statistics. But it turns out even amongst the world of those damned lies called statistics, there are some that are even worse than others. And it was recently brought to my attention, thanks to a Lotus Eaters podcast, that perhaps some of those worst statistics of all may actually be in the area of job seeking. What am I talking about? Well, I've brought on Harry Robinson from the Lotus Eaters podcast to bring us up to speed. Harry, welcome to the Aussie Wire.
Thank you very much for having me on. I'm grateful to be here.
Well, thank you so much for making the time. We've got time zone differences, so we've managed to make it work, and I'm very, very glad that we have. Now, we're going to put a link to this particular episode of your podcast into the description of this video, because I think it's well worth watching, and you cover a lot of ground. But I want to start at this problem of job vacancies and job seeking. Can you bring us up to speed? You've identified that even the jobs that are being advertised may not even be real.
Yes, this is a problem that's often referred to as ghost jobs. This isn't a problem that I specifically have identified, but it's very easy to do a quick Google search and be able to find all the information that you need about these. So what I was reporting on in the podcast segment that you've been referring to was a survey that was from an online loan company called Clarify Capital. And this has been reported on by Mashable. It's been reported on by Indeed. Indeed being the UK's, I think, #1 job listing website, where it provided information that the survey found 60% of job postings online are kept active for more than 1 month. And of those, 43% of managers who are putting these listings online said that they post job offerings to give the impression that the company is growing without necessarily having the intention to fill these job offers.
Wow.
They also have them online. 34% of them in this same survey said that they only keep them online so that they can placate overworked employees. So what they're doing is they're saying, because we've all worked menial retail jobs where you're understaffed, you're overworked, everybody is constantly struggling, and you're waiting for the cavalry to come in. You want somebody to come and lift off some of that burden from your shoulders. And so your manager might say, well, we're looking for people at the moment. We're looking for people right now, and we'll be able to fill up those positions. And it gives you that little boost. It gives you that little bit of hope, and you carry on. But a lot of people notice that those jobs don't ever get filled. Those positions don't ever get filled. Or if they do, the person will come in for a week, decide it's not for them, they'll leave, you don't get any burden taken off of your shoulders, and then the job never gets filled in the future. Anecdotally, my own fiance earlier on this year was working at a chain of corner shops, the Co-op, and her manager was very much in that way. He was putting up these job positions online saying, we'll fill this position very soon, and then you'll get all of this burden taken off your shoulder, because the job was in an area that was not only very, very busy, but also had lots of people coming in and stealing from the shop constantly. And they had they were chronically understaffed. And he said, we'll get this burden off your shoulders, we'll get these positions filled, and you won't have to worry about it anymore. You'll be better motivated, and you'll feel safer as well. Never happened.
Well, this is only one of the many layers that job seekers face, one of the many trials, I guess, that job seekers face. We've got this issue that you've identified here where the job doesn't even necessarily exist, or if it does, they're not actually wanting to fill it. We've also got the issue here. Now, I've grabbed some old articles here deliberately just to illustrate how long this issue has been going on, where the employment agencies, this is the agency that's supposed to help you find work, they put fake ads out there to attract people to sign up to the agency in order to then have them for future placements. Ironically, and this, I guess, speaks to the culture of these things. I'd love to get your thoughts on whether this is where the issue is even really coming from. These agencies themselves are often among the highest turnover agencies and one of the highest turnover industries in the world. Is this inherent to the way that we're doing work and the way that we're doing employment? Is this a fixable problem, or is this just baked into the cake?
I do think at the moment, I can't speak for recruitment, but I can speak for a very similar kind of job. I think at the moment we do have a problem where people are expected to move in and out of jobs constantly. There's no consistency. You may be expected to move vast geographical areas just to be able to get work. So people don't get any consistency in their lives. They're not allowed to tether themselves down anywhere, be able to earn a good living, buy themselves a home. This is a chronic problem in the UK where nobody can afford homes. So I've worked in a very high turnover industry in the past, and this was at call centers. The UK is absolutely filled with call centers, especially the north where I'm from. And what these jobs will have, if it's not that the stress of the job immediately puts people off so they'll stay a week and then leave, it's that there are lots of landmines set in place immediately so that your manager, if you don't get along with them, or if they just don't like the look of you, can get rid of you at any point. That's all of these incredibly harsh, strict, fine targets that you have to hit at any one time, that nobody can physically meet all of these targets all at the same time. If you're focusing on one thing, like being able to do the calls efficiently, you're not focusing on another thing, which is trying to be personable during the calls. So you're never going to get everything right. And what this means is that businesses can vindictively throw you aside at any point if they want to. And I can't speak specifically for recruitment, but I imagine it might be something like that, or just the stress of the job as well.
Well, I did work in a call center once upon a time. I lasted a week and then left when the manager was on my back because at the opening of the call, I wasn't saying the entire name of the company unabridged, which was a ridiculously long name, and clearly he wanted it said. And what I was finding was if I got halfway through that name, people were hanging up. So in the interest of getting better results for the company, I abbreviated that in order to get into the actual conversation. And then he wanted to breathe down my neck over that, a prime example of what you're talking about there. But there is a problem of real jobs that actually exist, that are going unfilled. I can't speak for the UK, but certainly in Australia, we have an annual problem of not enough people to pick our fruit. Australia obviously being a big primary producing country, fruits being seasonal, vegetables as well, but fruits and orchards are kind of the big one that every single year they're screaming out for more workers. And in 2022, this article here claims that there were 170,000 too few people picking fruit in that seasonal job. I mean, talking about having to move around for work, talking about short-term work. This is the epitome of all of those problems rolled into one. And yet we do need people to do this. We have sky-high food prices here in Australia, and I understand that's a global problem. And at the same time, food is going rotten on the orchard. How do we try and solve a problem like this?
Well, I can't speak exactly for the Australian situation, but I know that in the UK we have a lot of problems that stack all at the same time with this. So one, we have the expectation for lots of businesses that they'll have immigration to be able to plug up any employment gaps that they have. And what immigration does by saturating the market with all of this very low paid labor, it drives the wages down and means that native workers are unable to do or unwilling to do particular jobs because it doesn't pay enough. So if you were to restrict the labor market, wages would have to go up. People might be more willing to do that. But in the UK, especially because we have such an easy to access welfare state, what happens is that people will immediately jump on the welfare vine if it is more rational for them to do so. If you're going to be able to earn more money on welfare than you would working a normal job, obviously people are going to do that. And there's also a trick of the statistics that our government does. And this is called economic inactivity. These don't get classified under unemployment statistics. So in the UK, one of the big reasons that we have this massive drive for immigration is because of the fact that we are told that we have record low unemployment, but then we also have all of these unfilled jobs. Now, those job statistics will also count all of those jobs, those ghost jobs that we've been talking about. So there is the lie there. But economic inactivity, I believe, is when you have been economically inactive, so to speak, for around 1 to 3 months. And then you get shifted over to those employment statistics instead and not included. And a lot of that will be people on benefits. A lot of that will be people in education. A lot of that will be people who say that they're long-term sick, but a lot of them will be people, as I say, who are on benefits, who aren't working because it's not really rational for them to do so. If you improved the employment conditions for a lot of people, stopped importing all of these people from overseas, allowed wages to rise, you would be able to potentially unlock some of the labor force from those economic inactivity statistics that just go completely unused. Once again, I find it a big problem that oftentimes the problems as they actually are completely obscured by the way that the government handles the statistics because they're able to manipulate them. They're the ones providing us the statistics, and oftentimes the news outlets reporting them are going to report them in a way that is beneficial to the narratives that the mainstream wants us to believe.
Or just repeat whatever the official government press release has said. Lies, damned lies and statistics. Yep. You're certainly speaking my language there with the welfare trap, the situation where once people are in it, and this is not necessarily intentional, but it is certainly baked into the design of the welfare system. I know in the UK as well as in Australia that once you're on that welfare, there is a strong disincentive to want to start working because of how quickly you start to lose your benefits and so forth. And people can find themselves working for effective wages of insultingly low amounts of money. Look, this is a serious problem, but we're not going to solve it here today. But I think it's been good and refreshing to be able to chat with someone from the other side of the world where you're facing a lot of the same challenges. My hope is that by putting our heads together and raising awareness of these problems, of course, we can begin to see some better policies being put forward, maybe the public becoming a bit more sophisticated as to what they insist on from their politicians, and perhaps we can start to see some solutions. But thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire. I look forward to speaking with you again in future.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Cheers. Well, one of the things we like to focus on here at the Aussie Wire is accountability, getting to the truth, understanding what's really happened and the fallout from what's really happened. And of course, one of the topics that we need to be continuing to look at is the fallout from the COVID era, the vaccines, the mandates, the civil rights abuses, but also how our money was spent. Putting aside all the civil rights abuses, we have the right to expect that money is well spent and in an effective way, given that it comes from us as taxpayers. And on that front, I've got to say there's some really interesting things happening that have the potential to lead to some very good outcomes. Here to help me wrap my head around it, because there is a lot going on, and she's across it better than I am, is none other than our WA correspondent, Rebecca Barnett. Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire once again.
Hey, Topher.
Now,
We've got a few lawsuits to talk about.
We have so many lawsuits to talk about. Now, I've been enjoying your Substack, and by the way, your Twitter and your Instagram are also going off. My wife this morning, when she found out that I was chatting with you today, she was like, "Oh, tell her that her social media is going off." So everyone, if you're not following Rebecca Barnett, she's got a Substack which is amazing to read, and some great social media channels where you can follow her and be kept up to date with this sort of stuff. But look, let's dive in. There's some really interesting things happening now. Let's start with this one. Pfizer is taking Poland to court. What's this about?
Right. So back in the beginning of the whole vaccine rollout, Ursula von der Leyen from the EU Parliament negotiated that the EU countries collectively would purchase over 1 billion COVID vaccine doses from Pfizer. Now, obviously, it turned out to be not as effective as everyone thought it was going to be, and the desire to get vaccinated has not been as high in the population as was anticipated. So there's a lot of doses just left expiring and getting binned. So the Polish government tried to renegotiate the contract that was, to my understanding, essentially negotiated on their behalf. They were committed to purchase all these vaccines. There's 60 million doses that they don't want, that never could be used. And so they tried to renegotiate, and Pfizer just wouldn't let them. They were just like, no, pay up. So now Poland doesn't want to pay up. So Pfizer's suing them for payment of 60 million unused doses. And for context, Poland has less than a 40 million population last time I checked. So yeah, and we know that not everyone in the population is approved for vaccination. So, comparative to the population, that's a lot of vaccine doses that they don't need or want. And Pfizer's really shown no flexibility on accommodating that.
Well, I have no love for Pfizer at all, but looking at the government side of this, they're making very big decisions, spending enormous amounts of money based on very little information right in the middle of a panic. And now they're trying to extract themselves from that. And as much as I sympathise with the taxpayers of Poland and of the EU, there needs to be accountability not just on the Pfizer side of things, but also on their side of things for signing these documents in the first place, doesn't there?
Well, I think there was a furor over Ursula von der Leyen's role in that. So there was, if you remember, a little while ago, questions over whether there'd been some backdoor kind of communications between herself and Albert Bourla, who's the head of Pfizer. So they had some text messages going back and forth, and there were questions raised about whether she was kind of, whether she had the EU's best interests at heart or herself and her mates. It's a bit of both. It looks like the EU kind of put some of these governments in a position, but also the prime ministers or presidents of prime ministers, I think, in Europe, not a political scientist, don't quote me, they also have a role. And we know that in Romania, there's some pretty salty people who are investigating their own prime minister for having committed, to enormous quantities of the jabs that weren't used. So what have we got? A billion on Pfizer jabs.
And now this is Romanian prosecutors. So this has the prospect, and we don't know yet, but we'll keep an eye on it, of actually becoming a criminal issue. If Romanian government prosecutors are looking at it, it's because there is the belief that there may be some sort of criminality here. I'm not, of course, preempting what their conclusions may be. But this seems to be playing out quite a lot. I mean, there's $1 billion on Pfizer COVID jabs that were never used here. Another story that you brought to my attention, Germany is binning them. Is this a worldwide problem? Is this unique to the European Union?
Yeah, and we know that for sure. We know that in Australia, our government bought enough for 10 doses for every Australian, just of the primary series. So a huge number of those were binned. I don't recall the exact figures, but it was something like a third, or extraordinary number of doses were binned, and that was just of the primary series. It's definitely been a problem worldwide. You can see why people start to ask serious questions about corruption. It just doesn't look right on the face of it. Why would any government think that we need 10 doses per person of a product that expires before we're even at the fourth dose,
And a product that expires and that was acknowledged from the start there would be mutations that would require changes to the makeup of the vaccines in any case. So buying 10 per person of that first, I mean, I can't make head nor tail of it, honestly. Now, there is some better news happening elsewhere in the world, though, in terms of lawsuits going the other way. We've talked about Pfizer trying to sue countries to get money out of their taxpayers, but actually over in Texas, the good old Texas Attorney General Paxton has taken Pfizer to court again. He's doing it over other issues not related to the COVID-19 vaccines. Tell us about this lawsuit, though.
Yeah, so the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, on behalf of the state of Texas, is suing Pfizer for essentially misleading and deceiving the public about the effectiveness of its vaccine. So he's saying they exaggerated it and deceived the public. So there's a few grounds for that. One is the duration of protection, and it is alleged. I do believe that regulatory filings show that Pfizer withheld information that it had about how long the duration of protection was, and allowed the public messaging to give the impression that it would protect you essentially indefinitely or for a much longer time than it does, when they had information that was contrary to that, but they allowed the messaging to carry on. There was the misleading over transmission, where again, Pfizer's clever. They didn't outright say, oh, it will stop all transmission, but they allowed people to think that they would be protecting their family and they would be protecting their community by getting vaccinated, when there was no data to support that. And then variant protection. There's as the virus kept mutating, the allegation is that Pfizer allowed people to think that vaccine targeted to an old strain would protect them just as well against a new strain, when again there just wasn't data to support that. And then after that, when people did say, well, actually that's not right, here's data to show that that's not right, we're questioning the truth of Pfizer's statements or insinuations. The allegation is that Pfizer engaged in suppression of those people's speech, particularly in colluding with social media, possibly government. And Alex Berenson is one high-profile person he's a American journalist. He's a high-profile case of that kind of suppression. He's actually suing Pfizer for suppressing his First Amendment rights in collusion with the White House. So this will presumably be one of many court cases to come forward alleging the same.
Well, it's all a bit of a mess, and I remember saying as we approached Christmas last year, I gave my Christmas message, as I do, and there will, of course, be one coming up this year as well. But the point that I made last year was that, in my view, 2023 would be the year when the pushback began in earnest. Now, that's not to say that we would be winning in 2023, but that's when the pushback would begin in earnest. And it's taken a little bit longer than I'd hoped, but I'd say that the last 6 months, we've certainly seen things hotting up, lawsuits flying around the place, the suggestion, or at least the opportunity for criminal charges to begin to be laid. And a lot of the people that went along with this early on becoming increasingly unhappy with the way that it's all played out. How do you see this playing out in the future?
Well, going off prior pharmaceutical fraud, criminality and corruption cases, my feeling is that this will take a decade, maybe two.
Yeah.
The thalidomide survivors only just got a national apology last week, and this is decades
years.
on.
62 years. Yeah.
Right.
And honestly, if I can be cynical for a second, I don't think that the Australian Prime Minister did that out of the care of his heart. I think he did that because he needed something to try and get him a bounce in the polls. 62 years is a strange anniversary to finally issue an apology on, and I think it was done for political reasons, not out of any real sincerity, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I can't comment on that, but it's a long time to wait. And the DES scandal, which is similar to the thalidomide scandal, where a drug's given to mothers during pregnancy, that affects then their children and their grandchildren. Again, that took decades for an apology and for class actions to get going. You think about the OxyContin scandal. I mean, to my mind, that story's not finished. We've had Dope Sick on Netflix, and then there's another one that's come out. I can't remember the name of it, but Purdue Pharma has had some degree of accountability. They've been held to accountability to a degree, not enough in my opinion, and probably not in the opinion of the victims' families, but OxyContin's still for sale. So, and there's still an opioid crisis in the US, so I don't even think that story's finished.
Yeah.
That's been going for decades. So my feeling is that this is not something that's going to be just dealt with in the next year or two and we'll all get justice. And I just don't think that's really how it works with this industry. I think this industry is very powerful, and they've got the best lawyers. They're very experienced in, okay, we'll take the slap on the wrist or we'll pay a few $1 billion that, doesn't really put much of a dent in the bottom line as it is. And I've seen people say what we need is criminal prosecutions for the people at the top who are in charge of it, and they need to go to jail. And that's my personal opinion, that if all that is happening to the people who are responsible for this level of what appears to be corruption, fraud, criminality, if all they have to do is just pay a fine, well, that's a business model. Keep doing what you're doing, pay a fine every so often, and make net profit. So why would you stop? Why would you stop the bad behavior under that model? You wouldn't. So there need to be tougher consequences, I think. But I can't see that happening in the near future. What do you think?
I tend to agree with that whole assessment. And buttressing your point is the fact that these are companies that have already, before COVID, before their vaccines for the coronavirus came out, they've already paid the largest criminal fines of any organisation in history. And that hasn't deterred them from engaging in what you rightly say appears to be some corrupt, and certainly the Attorney General of Texas would allege misleading and dishonest behaviour with regard to the effectiveness, at the very least, if not also safety and all sorts of other things. There's a lot that we're not saying here, of course. And so if those largest ever criminal fines were not enough to deter them from then re-engaging in the exact sort of behaviour, allegedly, that they have been found guilty of in the past, then you have to wonder what would it take to change their behaviour. And I'm with you. I think we need to get to the point where there are individuals being criminally held to account for what's happened, but the road there is a long one. This is a 10, 15, 20-year journey. So any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, there's a couple of class actions in the works in Australia. There's one that's already taking on members and it's filed, Dr. Mel McCann's, and there's another one in the works. And they are promising in the sense that if they succeed and they hold the downstream players to account, so the officials who signed off on all of this, right down to the medical professionals, actually, in one of the cases is looking at that, then it may make those players reticent to participate in the future, and that would make it potentially harder for the pharmaceutical companies to push them or to coerce them into or to incentivize them into allowing the bad behaviour from upstream.
There's also a reality that you need to build up a case if ultimately the objective is to see criminal liability and criminal responsibility for those individuals at the very top, which I agree needs to be the objective. In order to get there, you first have to prove in a court of law that something wrong was done. And you don't do that by accusing them criminally. You do that by a much more fundamental court case. And then once that's been won, you can then build another case on top of that and build another case on top of that. And over a period of years and multiple cases, we may get to the point where eventually those charges can be laid. But I think we're a fair way away even from that. Well, thank you. Sorry?
No, I agree. I just think it's going to be a bit of a slog. And lawfare will take however long it takes. But I don't think they'll get away with it forever, but I don't think it's going to change anytime soon, if that makes sense. And I don't think that undermines the fact that the lawsuits need to continue being brought.
Absolutely. And anyone who isn't already following Rebecca Barnett's Substack, it's Dystopian Down Under, as well as all over social media, I highly recommend follow her work. And we will, of course, here at the Aussie Wire, stay across this story and many others as well. Rebecca Barnett, thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Aussie Wire News. We release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. You can catch up on past episodes at theaussiewire.com and be sure to check out our blog. And most importantly, make sure you join our email list so that we can keep in touch. And if you appreciate what we do and would like to help us continue to bring you truth, freedom and hope, then please become an insider via the link below, where you'll get exclusive content, giveaways, discounts and special deals, and of course our wonderful insiders community. The link to become an insider is in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Topher Field, and this is the Aussie Wire.